Hello, welcome to my channel. I'm Sari and today I'm going to show you how to paint this super easy realistic pumpkin. For the first layer on the pumpkin, I'm using the wet and wet technique, meaning I applied a glaze of water on the whole of the pumpkin first before laying down the paints. Then I applied the orange color mixture on the left and just the warm yellow on the right. The light source is on the right, so I'm laying lighter colors on this side. The lower part of the pumpkin is in the shadow area, so I'm applying a dilute French ultramarine blue here. For shadow colors, we have several options. We can use cool colors like blues or violets. We can mix them with neutral tint to make darker values. And we can also mix them with their complementary colors to mute them. A quick reminder, complementary colors are the ones that sit opposite to each other on the color wheel. For the stem and the tendrils, I'm using very dilute burnt sienna and a little bit of French ultramarine for the stem on the left. Now that the first layer is completely dry, I'm taking my orange color mixture and applying using the wet and dry technique in this section. In this area, I applied the warm yellow in the first layer. So now in the second layer, I'm just repeating the same pigment to enhance the color. Next, I'm applying some more of the orange color mixture here. I'm using the wet and dry technique on this section because I wanted to give a little bit more definition to this area. However, if you prefer the wet and wet technique, it's perfectly alright. Now I'm using the wet and wet technique to apply the shadow color mixture prepared earlier in the ridges of the pumpkin. I'm using the wet and wet technique here to avoid hard edges. I dropped in some French ultramarine blue to reinforce color and used my brush to blend to create soft edges. I'm using the wet and wet again. So now I'm applying a good glaze of water. Then I dropped in first a thicker consistency of the cadmium-free red and then the warm orange mixture and the shadow color mixture in the ridges. A couple of things to keep in mind while doing the wet and wet on an already painted surface. First of all, the previous layer should be completely dry. And secondly, remember to use the brush very gently to avoid reactivating the paint underneath. Once again, applied a layer of water and then taking a thicker consistency of the shadow color mixture applied in the ridges of the pumpkin of this section. And then dropped in some orange color mixture, covering only some part of the section and leaving some areas for the first layer to show through. For the second layer on the stem, once again I'm using burnt sienna but a little bit thicker consistency, and I also used a little bit of sepia to create some lines for details. Then I darkened the left side of the stem with a thicker consistency of the shadow color mixture. Now that the second layer is completely dry, I'm preparing the surface for the third layer. First, I applied clean water to wet the surface, and then I'm using the same pigments, slightly thicker consistency, and applying it on the section. I used the shadow colors that I mixed earlier to paint the areas in shadow. To ground the pumpkin, I used 2 of the super granulating pigments from Schmincke. That's because I wanted to paint it in one simple layer and also wanted it to have some texture. So the granulating pigments work the best when applied wet on wet. First I applied water on the whole surface and then applied Schmincke super granulating desert brown, followed by the desert green at the base of the pumpkin. Other optional colors for this part are burnt sienna, burnt umber and sepia. The last layer on the pumpkin, I am going to glaze it with a very transparent color mixture using permanent rose and Winsor lemon. Permanent rose is a transparent pigment and Winsor lemon is semi-transparent. This mixture, when very dilute, is extremely transparent and allows the underneath layers to show through. I applied this color mixture on the whole of the pumpkin to accentuate the warmth. As a finishing touch, I also darkened the shadow areas. And here's the finished painting. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and I will see you soon with a new tutorial. Bye for now.